Welcome to New Scientist Weekly. We're going to start with two important messages. First, you'll hear from historian Nancy MacLean from Duke University.
What we are experiencing now in the United States under the second Trump administration is deadly serious. It is a war on science, knowledge, and expertise in general, and it is a war that is enlisting every lever of executive power available. As a U.S. historian, I can tell you that we have never seen anything akin to this before in audacity and scale, even at the height of the Cold War Red Scare.
And now you're going to hear Gretchen Goldman, and she's president of the Union of Concerned Scientists in Washington, D.C.
We are witnessing an all-out assault on federal science in the United States. Long-standing legal precedent, policies, processes, and norms are all being ignored. Critical government functions are being disrupted, and the scientific community is reeling.
On the show this week, we're going to get into what's at stake in the US. I'm Rowan Hooper, joined in New York this week by Chelsea White. Hey, Chelsea.
Hi. Yes, on the show this week, we're going to talk about the chaos engulfing science here in the US.
And we should say it's happening in the US, but it affects the rest of the world. The US is by far the biggest funder of science in the world. So an attack on US science is an attack on all of science.
And we're also hearing about the latest understanding on whale song, on whether whale song is a kind of language. And we find the scientifically perfect way to boil an egg. Before
we get to that important stuff, we're going to start with this small matter of the war on American science.
Yeah, it does seem quite important. As many know, there's a lot happening at the moment, and that's part of the game plan here, which is to just generate chaos. James Deneen is here with us. James, let's start with how the administration is aiming to remove references to climate change from government websites.
Yeah, so some of this happened during the first Trump administration, but this is really ratcheted up in a big way. Agencies like the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of Defense and many others have deleted web pages that make reference to climate change and removed mentions of global warming and climate change and related subjects from thousands of pages. That comes as billions of dollars of research grants from the National Science Foundation are under review to determine if they align with the administration's objectives, which could impact climate-related research, although it's unclear exactly how at the moment. And more than 1,000 employees at the Environmental Protection Agency were warned they could be fired at any time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of anxiety going around, isn't there? Quite understandably.
Yeah, I spoke with the climate scientist yesterday who was visibly emotional about a lot of this that's happening. And there was an episode this week that really highlighted all of this. One of the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's main climate data portals came offline. And this came right after reports that Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency had accessed the Climate and Weather Agency's computer system. And this raised a lot of concern among researchers, especially on social media, that the data would no longer be accessible. But NOAA says that outage was actually just for routine maintenance, and the site is back up and running for now. So that's good. But just the idea we could lose access to such fundamental scientific information and data about our planet is definitely concerning. Like you said, not just for the U.S., but for the world. The U.S. is a major provider of climate and weather data. So a loss of access to climate or other scientific data here would affect researchers everywhere.
Yeah, alarm bells are ringing, and it's not just in the sort of climate sector. We should also think about all of the effects that the Trump administration has had on the sciences with regard to health. So Grace Wade is here. Grace, there's been this huge amount of chaos at the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so the NIH was ordered to pause nearly all external communications and activities, and that includes reviewing and awarding research grants. As such, all grant review sessions scheduled for January were canceled, and weekly reports on disease surveillance and treatment recommendations from the CDC have been on hold since January 21st. And so as you can imagine, this has generated a bunch of confusion and uncertainty. Both employees and their collaborators don't have a clear understanding of what is going on or when these pauses will end, which makes it harder or in some cases impossible for them to do their work. I will say that we are starting to see some activities get up and running again. So the FDA has started issuing warnings about medications, and the CDC began sharing influenza surveillance data again. And many of the grant review sessions scheduled for February are proceeding, but not all. For instance, meetings of the National Advisory Council on Minority Health and Health Disparities and the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute were canceled, and we just don't really know why.
Yeah, there's also, in order to align with President Trump's executive orders to halt work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and another order that only recognizes two genders, there's a long list of words that are being scrutinized in these grants at the NSF and elsewhere, right? So these are words like underrepresented or socioeconomic or disability or women. And so that brings up a lot of questions about what kind of research will be going forward once it begins again.
Yeah, and some words are being outright banned. So the CDC has ordered any publication that uses the word gender or transgender, for instance, to be pulled or revised, even if they have already been submitted or accepted to journals. There are also efforts to control publicly available information posted by health agencies like the CDC. Key websites on contraception guidelines or information about HIV risk in LGBTQ communities were taken offline in the first few weeks. While some of them are back, including a tool to track rates of infectious diseases, others are still down or have been scrubbed of certain words or groups of people. Researchers I've spoken with are quite worried about large data sets being tampered with. Even things like decades-long surveys on youth mental health have disappeared, presumably because it includes information on participants' gender.
Wow. And Grace, what about foreign aid? Because USAID, that's the US Agency for International Development, that's really under fire, isn't it? And that puts lives at immediate risk.
Right. So USAID provides humanitarian assistance to more than 100 countries, employs about 10,000 people, and has a budget of more than $40 billion a year. And Elon Musk, who has been tasked with slashing government spending, has described USAID as, quote, a criminal organization on X, and claiming it is time for it to die, and that, quote, we spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper.
USAID does things like provide HIV medicine to children, prosthetic limbs to soldiers in Ukraine. It clears landmines around the world. It helps in Africa. It helps prevent Ebola outbreaks. It does all this stuff.
Yeah, it does amazing work around the world, and it helps keep Americans and its allies safe by containing the spread of infectious diseases and helps stabilizing certain regions.
I will also say that USAID also funds scientific research. It sort of operates from the perspective that we live in a connected world, which we do, and it does really important work that helps predict food crises or clinical trials on HIV and malaria treatments. Really, really crucial stuff.
Let's end this segment with Gretchen Goldman again. As I said, she's the president of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I asked her what we can do.
These memos don't erase reality. You can't override legal precedent and congressional power with a quick executive order out of the White House. So we have to fight this illegal power grab. Despair is not an option. The scientific community must be clear-eyed about the path ahead. We can show up for each other, we can be creative, and we can choose what's right over what's easy. We're going to need a lot of brave people. We're not backing down. The Union of Concerned Scientists is here, and many others are working to fight this through all levers possible because this can't stand, it won't stand, and we're ready to fight.
Okay, now we're going to completely change the subject. Rowan, you've been talking with our Australia reporter, James Woodford, about whales. So let's hear some.
Now that is the song of a humpback whale, and I called it a song, but it really did sound like one side of a conversation rather than a song. And there is a growing body of work suggesting that whale songs have a similar structure to human language. And that brings the possibility of translating their calls and understanding what they're saying. Our Australia reporter, James Woodford, has been looking into this. He joins us now. Welcome, James. What a beautiful background you've got there. I know you've got some humpback whales to the east coast of Australia. Actually, we've got one at the moment off the south coast of England swimming around.
G'day there, Rowan. Yeah, indeed, we have so many humpback whales here. Right now, I'm on the coast 4 hours south of Sydney, and every year hundreds of humpbacks migrate just a few hundred meters away from where I'm sitting right now.
Wow, that's really beautiful, amazing. Now, look, let's talk about these studies that are out on whale language this week. Can you take us through them?
Yeah, so the first study, a team of researchers, they collected 8 years of whale songs recorded in the waters around the New Caledonia breeding grounds. And according to the scientists, there's probably about 150 unique sounds that they recorded in those 8 years that are employed by the whales in their songs. So the first job that had to be completed by the researchers was to alpha-numerically encode every song from every recording. And as Jenny Allen from Griffith University in Queensland told me, basically it's a different grouping of sounds. So one year they might be doing grunt, grunt, squeak, and so that'll be like AAB. Then another year they might have moan, squeak, grunt, and so that would be like CBA. Which, yeah, so it's pretty mind-blowing to think about the amount of work that she had to do to encode all this data. And then the next step was to work out how to analyze all that data. And to me, this is where it gets really interesting, because they decided to apply an analysis that uses the way that human infants learn to talk. And excuse the jargon here, but it's called transitional probability. So an example is, so if you imagine the phrase pretty flowers, so a child will intuitively recognize that the syllables pre and t are more likely to go together than tea and flower. And so once all this encoded whale song was analyzed, by looking at these same kind of transitions that a child uses to recognize separate words, the team discovered that distribution graphs of whale sounds actually follow the same pattern that's found across all human languages.
Wow. Okay, I think it's time to hear another clip of that song. Let's hear some more. You know, I really feel myself straining to interpret what they might be saying there. I mean, that's probably illusory, but, I start to feel that they're saying something.
It definitely is illusory, because, we can't get into what the meaning is. But the important part of this is that they discovered what's called a Zipfian distribution curve. And that means that where the most common words / sounds occur in this very striking power law on a graph. So in other words, a very clear line. And to put that into lay terms, the less common sounds and words in both human language and whales drop off in a predictable way. And then the other striking discovery is that the most common whale sounds tend to be short, just as the most common human words are also short. So as one researcher told me, that if you were to analyze War and Peace, the most frequent word in that immense novel will occur twice as frequently as the next one, and so on. And the fascinating thing is that the researchers found a similar pattern in whale songs.
Okay, so that's a solid observation that there's some real complexity in this song. And what about the other study that's out this week?
Yeah, so in a way, I mean, these are very complementary studies because Mason Youngblood at Stony Brook University in the United States and his colleagues, they found that these structural similarities to human language may not just be limited to humpbacks. So his team found that another linguistic rule, which is called Menzerath's law, and that predicts that sentences with more words should be composed of shorter words. And they found that that was present in 11 of 16 cetacean species. And Zipf's law of abbreviation was found in 2 of 5 cetacean species.
So look, you said earlier it was definitely illusory that there's meaning there or complex meaning. But what can we say about whether these songs are actually language in the way that we understand that?
Yeah. So as I said before, that and one of the things that the team goes to great pains to say is that their study does not prove meaning. These are just songs, and perhaps in the same way that we sing songs. And as Jenny Allen told me, the consensus is, and in her very strong opinion, after listening to 8 years worth of these songs, is that basically, and in her words, they just say, I'm the fittest, I'm the sexiest male, you should mate with me, and you shouldn't mate with him.
I mean, I get that totally. I just feel like there's more. I did a story last year on using AI to analyze whale song. And one thing I came across was a study of logbooks of 19th century whalers. And they showed that the success rate of the hunts started falling off by more than 50% after a few years. And it was because the whales shared tactics among themselves to avoid the hunters. So they learned, whaling boats back then were wind powered, they were sailboats, and the whales learned to swim upwind of the whalers. And they somehow told other whales like that. So that was just really intriguing. They somehow communicated this understanding of what other whalers, what the hunters were doing. And then last year, there was this analysis of sperm whales. So they have this really complex pattern of clicks called coders, which turns out to be effectively like a phonetic alphabet. There's 18 different patterns of clicks that they call coders, and they're modified and combined in hundreds of different ways, just like an alphabet is, and they're deployed in sentences that may well be sentences like we have sentences. So I can't wait to see what happens when we can get much more data from sperm whales especially, and then maybe use AI to really start getting into what's going on and hopefully translating some of that stuff.
So a few weeks ago, we were in the studio talking about reporter Alex Wilkins' story on the perfect way to make cacio e pepe pasta. And Alex, you're back again with the scientifically perfect way to boil an egg.
Yes, the food scientists are back at it again, this time with eggs. I've brought an egg to demonstrate.
We need reminding of what
in case you've forgotten. Yep. Exactly. Yep. So they found that everyone knows how to boil an egg. It's 7-8 minutes in the pan, depending on how much you like the yolk cooked. But they found actually the perfect way to cook it is to spend 32 minutes boiling it, moving it between a 100-degree boiling water pan and a 30-degree pan every 2 minutes.
Wow.
The reason they did this is they ran some models and they found that actually the two ingredients in an egg, the yolk and the white, cook at different temperatures. And when you cook it normally, the yolk doesn't cook at the right temperature, but the white does. So by doing this method where you transport it between 2 pans every 2 minutes, the white and the yolk cook at different temperatures kind of individually. So when you take the egg out, both the white and the yolk will be
And
perfectly cooked.
You speak from experience.
Yes, I tried this myself in my kitchen yesterday.
Yeah.
I spent half an hour putting it between one pan and the other, timing myself religiously, and I tried it afterwards.
And?
It tastes pretty good. It was nice. The yolk and the white. Yeah,
it was nice.
It was not worth the half an hour that I spent cooking it.
Is the egg you brought perfectly boiled too? Does Rowan get to try some?
This is sadly a raw egg just for demonstration purposes. I ate both the eggs. Well, I compared it to my own. I normally spend about 7 minutes boiling an egg, so I compared the two yesterday. And it was noticeably better. Like the consistency of the yolk and the white was slightly more, I don't know, it felt better in the mouth, tasted slightly better.
Wow.
If I could cook an egg like that in 7 minutes, I probably would, but I don't have the time for that, and I doubt many people do.
So I might try it. I use this method from Heston Blumenthal, the chef, and he says you put your eggs in as small a pan as possible, cover it with water, cold water, bring it to a boil as fast as you can. Then when it's boiled, take it off the heat, leave with the lid on, and then time 6 minutes, and then it's ready. And that works actually really well.
And that would take, 14 minutes total if you're...
To bring to the boil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's half the time of this method. Yeah.
The other thing it makes me think of is, I remember when King Charles, before he was king, I heard that he ordered the kitchens to make 6 different eggs for him so that they could guarantee one would be perfect. So he'd get very cross if one wasn't perfect. So maybe the kitchens at Buckingham Palace can now adopt your method of doing half an hour and just getting the perfect egg, and they would save eggs.
We'll have to send him a copy of the magazine so he can read the article.
Yeah. Well, his dad used to read it, actually. So
really?
We should carry on the tradition.
We should.
Yeah.
That's all for this week. Thanks to all our guests, and thanks to you for listening. Do tell your friends about us and give us a 5-star rating and a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
And we'll be back next week. Bye for now.
Bye.
It was a fun experiment, but I will not be doing it again.